Ed, she's up. What is it, Sheridan?
I can't sleep.
Ed. Ed, she's up again.
Again?
Yeah.
Okay, Sheridan. Let's get back to bed. Sheridan, you need to stay in bed.
Okay.
Sweet dreams, Sheridan.
Good night, Mom. Good night, Dad.
Good night, sweetie. I just don't get it. She wakes us up every night without fail.
That in addition to being a stinker all day long. Maybe something's wrong.
Nah. I'm sure it's just something she'll grow out of.
Sweet dreams, Ed.
Yeah, right.
Ed.
And welcome back to our second session of Growing Kids God's Way. We trust that your week was filled with plenty of opportunities to give your children the moral reason why. We want you to know that in this particular session, Anne-Marie, we're going to be talking about the biblical foundations of the family. What does that look like?
Well, it talks about from the very beginning in the book of Genesis when God created male and female did He make them, and the importance of the marriage relationship and how that impacts the whole entire family and your relationship with your children.
That's right. You know, we're going to have plenty of couples that are going to be joining us, but we also realize that we have a number of single parents joining us, and we want you to know that these principles do apply to you. And we will be making reference to the single parent and how these principles can be incorporated into your unique situation. So in a moment, our class is going to join us, so get ready. We're going to come right back with the biblical foundations of the family. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to our second session of Growing Kids God's Way. This is entitled Right Beginnings. I really cannot go forward in our teaching. I cannot talk to you more about training your children in moral character, talking to you about biblical discipline, talk to you about building a trusting relationship without the context of this lesson. For all of these things need a family context. Now, what we're going to be discussing in this particular session is the importance of the husband-wife relationship to the entire parenting process. Our focus will be on two related evils that threaten successful parenting and leads to the demise of the family. Number one, it is not understanding the importance of the husband-wife relationship in the parenting process. And number two, it is child-centered parenting. Let's get started with a very basic premise. Moms and dads, the greatest overall influence that you're going to have in your parenting will not come while you're in your role as a mom and dad, but rather while you're in your role as a husband and wife. In this particular lesson, I plan on demonstrating that truth to you, and the place that I want to take you to verify it is the book of beginnings. It's the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. The biblical foundations of the family are established really in the opening chapters of this particular book, especially chapter 2. Now, what makes chapter 2 of the book of Genesis so significant is that God took one portion of the sixth day of creation, as recorded in Genesis chapter 1, and He amplified the details for our understanding, and then He presents them all to us as chapter 2. Actually, chapter 2 of Genesis is one great big parenthesis that fits right between Genesis 1:26 and 1:27. That is, between those two verses, you can take the chronological order of Genesis chapter 2 and put them there. It was the Lord's intent, obviously, that we would know exactly what He was thinking when He made man and He formed the family. Now, the stage is set for us in Genesis 2, verses 7 through 17. There we read that God planted a garden, and He took man, created man, and He brought man to the garden. He placed man in the garden to take care of it, to till it. That is the backdrop for the next major event, the creation of the woman. Now, there are two central questions that we need to ask, and we will answer. Number one, why did God create the woman? And number two, why did God establish marriage? Let's talk about this. Those questions are going to be answered, and we're going to start out in Genesis 2:18. It's in this particular verse that God clearly states man's condition when He said, "It is not good for a man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him." Now, in this one verse, please understand that God declares His intent for the creation of the woman. Man was alone, He said, and that was not good. Let me just talk to you about the word alone so you could understand the deeper meaning of what's being communicated. Obviously, Adam wasn't alone at that point of creation. I mean, he was surrounded with creation. All the animals were already created, and he had a relationship with God. So in the context of this word alone, we have to understand it that he was alone emotionally, he was alone companion-wise, he was alone spiritually, he was alone physically, he was alone socially, with one like himself. That's the key. That's what alone means. Not good to be alone refers to the absence of another like Adam with a view towards completing the total person. Actually, what really God is talking about is the concept of intimacy here. Now, the word helper is also an interesting word. The word helper does not mean a hired hand like we hire some schoolboys to help us do some menial task and we pay them a minimum wage and then send them on their way. But rather, the word helper is a very beautiful word. It means completer. It means complement. So when God said, "It is not good for man to be alone, I will make him a helper suitable," in fact, what He was declaring is that He is going to bring to man the one that would complete him. He was going to bring to man his complement, the woman. But then He does something very interesting. I would think that if God's going to make this declaration, why not then just go to the creation of the woman? But He doesn't do that. What He has Adam do after He tells us that of his condition is begin the process of naming the animals. In Genesis 2:19 and 20 we read this, "Out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called a living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all of the cattle and to all the birds of the sky and to every beast of the field. But for Adam," here's the key, "there was not found a helper suitable for him." I like to, first of all, contextualize what I'm seeing here. I like to think that maybe like when the animals came to the ark, that they came in front of Adam in pairs, male and female. And as Adam was naming all of the animals, he became very aware that of creation present, there was not yet anything created like me. Actually, what God was doing is He was using an illustrative teaching device for Adam's sake, to arouse in Adam a deeper understanding for one after his own kind. He clearly wanted Adam to understand that that complement, that completer, that there is no substitute currently created, that completer was going to come from his hands. So then we read in Genesis 2:21 through 23, "So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then He took one of his ribs, and He closed up the flesh at that place. And the Lord God fashioned into a woman the rib which He had taken from the man, and brought her to the man. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." Let me summarize what we have up to this point. Please note that God did not create, nor did He recreate a second being, but rather He took from Adam's side a portion of his being, and He fashioned that portion into a woman, so that the crown of creation was the holy union of the man and woman. The act that in bringing that woman to man was more than just the creation of another species, ladies and gentlemen. It was an establishment of a social relationship called marriage. This is important that you understand, that the interpersonal social dynamics of the marriage relationship is so different than that of the parent-child relationship. They're not the same. The marriage relationship was affirmed by God in Genesis 2:22. Please notice that. The very fact that God didn't create the woman someplace in the garden, then give her a little pat, and then said, "Okay, come on, get out there," and send her off into the garden where maybe there would be a chance meeting of Adam and Eve. Rather, he took Eve and He brought Eve to the man. That is rather significant. We know the significance of the marriage relationship was declared by Moses in Genesis 2:24, when Moses said this, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave unto his wife." We know the marriage relationship was confirmed by Jesus in Matthew 19:4-6 and Mark 10:7-8, when Jesus revisited the creation story. The Apostle Paul also followed up on this. In Ephesians chapter 5, he brings this truth to bear as he goes back and revisits the creation story. So marriage has an incredibly high priority. Even Adam recognized this. Adam recognized that Eve was so different than creation. In fact, it was a revelation. You know, when we read this one portion of the text, when Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, she shall be called woman," you have to wonder, how romantic is that? I mean, this is the first introduction. This is man looking at probably the most beautiful woman in the world. Well, literally it was, and probably figuratively, this was the most beautiful woman in the world. And so what comes out of his mouth? "Oh, you're my bone of my bones, you're my flesh of my flesh." How romantic. Some men, may I suggest that maybe tomorrow morning when your wife turns over and you look at her pleasant face, you say, "Oh, you are my bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh." That is something very beautiful. Do you think not? You know, when Neil Armstrong stepped out of that ship and put his foot on the moon, that famous statement that he broadcast around the world was, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." He had a couple of months to prepare for that statement. But I want you to think about Adam. He did not have time because the woman was brought to him. And what were the first words that come out of his mouth? He says to her, "You are the bone of my bones. You are the flesh of my flesh." How romantic, if you truly understand it. In the truest sense, it's some of the most beautiful poetic language in all of Scripture, because in that moment, what Adam was doing was communicating revelation, a new awareness. He was acknowledging the very fact that you have my flesh. That's what he was saying. He realized you're unlike anything in creation. You have my bones. We are one. It was a beautiful moment. It was poetry because he realized what God had done in the moment. And just as we are to realize every day. In 5 verses, you have an explanation as to why God created the woman and established marriage. Why did God create the woman? Very simply. Because man was alone and needed someone to complete him. One who Adam would neither worship like God or rule over like the animals. And why did God establish marriage? Because through marriage, partners may serve one another and through their lives serve others. See, through the doorway of marriage, families would be created, and God, through the family of Israel first and then the church second, would show forth His praises and His glory. It was the family, starting with marriage, that God would then begin to communicate to all the nations of the world who He was. That's why the family is so important, and that's why understanding the foundations of the family are so important. Thus, the crowning achievement in creation was the holy union of the man and the woman. It was then that God declared, listen to this is great. It was then that God declared that all creation was very good. Genesis 1:31. And then he rested from his work. Now that's significant. That's significant because we go back to Genesis 2:18. God said, it's not good for man to be alone. Then he declared, I will make him a helper suitable. Then we get done with creation, and God says, you know, everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. Nothing is lacking. Nothing is missing. Significant statement, because you'll have to notice that there are no children included in the garden. You see, actually, the woman completes the man, and the man completes the woman, and that was true right from the beginning. You realize you are a complete family when you join together as a husband and wife? You are completed at that point. Children do not make you a family. Your children expand the family. When you come together as a husband and wife, you are already a completed family. And the glory of our children, the blessing of our children, is that they just expand the expression of our love. But that is rather important. You see, if children were necessary in order to complete the man, then they would have been there. Whether it be 2.3 or 10 children, they would have been in the original creation process. But children were not necessary to complete. For God to step back from creation after every day saying it is good, and then on the final day stepping back and saying it is very good. That is his final declaration. This is exactly what I wanted. This is now complete. Now, Emery and I believe that 4 basic principles can be drawn from the 5 verses of Genesis 2:18 to 2:22 that governs family relationships, that really lays down the foundation of growing kids God's way. Let's look at these principles. Principle number 1. By God's design, the husband-wife relationship is the first social relationship established in Scripture. Social is the key word there. We know that man acts and he reacts and he interacts with other human beings. And we also know that the principles of social interaction are divinely orchestrated. Do you realize that God could have started all of creation with 2 sisters if he wanted? Or he could have started all of creation with 2 brothers, or a mother-daughter combination. But in his infinite wisdom, God chose to start all of humanity with a husband-wife relationship and work from there. Whenever you have something first, just keep this in mind, whenever you have something first in Genesis, it carries extra weight because you're getting God's original intent. And so what we have here is the first social relationship established in Scripture. Principle 2 says this: by God's design, the husband-wife relationship is the first in a system of dependent relationships. Key word there, dependent. In God's economy, listen now, the strength of all family relationships are dependent upon the strength of the husband-wife relationship. That truth will always be there. The dependency factor is inherent in all of creation. The quality, listen, the quality of the parent-child relationship is absolutely dependent upon the quality of the husband-wife relationship. We will say to you moms, you can spend 24 hours a day with your children. You could play with them. You could nurture them. You could be with them all the time. Moms, listen to me. You will never be a better mother than what you are as a wife. Why is that? Well, there's this dependency factor. And you dads, you could come home from work, you could play with your kids, you could buy them all types of special things, you can go camping and do trips, you could spend all that quality and quantity time, and gentlemen, you will never be a better daddy, a better father than what you are as a husband. Why? It's because of this dependency factor. The quality of the mother-child relationship, the quality of the father-child relationship is absolutely dependent upon the quality of the husband-wife relationship. It's part of the fabric of creation. God doesn't alter his scheme. He doesn't alter his ways. When we look at the dependency factor we see in creation, day 2 was dependent upon day 1. Day 3 of creation depended upon day 2. Day 4 of creation depended upon day 3. The same dependency factor, it flows all the way through his moral laws and relational laws. Principle 3 says this: as a result of God's design, the husband-wife relationship must be viewed as the priority relationship in the family. Now there's a daring statement. I am here talking to you about parenting, and I am saying to you right up front that if you want to be successful in parenting, make sure that you view your marriage as an absolute priority. Let me tell you why. Priority speaks to the prevailing attitude that must be present for successful parenting. We believe with our whole heart, if you really love your children, then give them a beautiful gift. The gift of your love for each other. Now I know that when single moms are sitting in our classes, and many of them will be in the future, that this is a hard thing. But we praise God for His wonderful gift of grace because we realize in the single parent household, He really is the father of the fatherless. He really is the protector. He will come along and add the grace that is not there, the grace that you may have as your partner. We'll talk more about this, but I want you to know that if you are able to give your children a twosome in partnership, then give them the gift of love. See, your children must have the confidence in your relationship. You know, we used to go out on our Friday nights or Saturday nights, Anne-Marie and I, and the children would be coming to the door and we'd say, we're going out, and you're not coming. And the reason you're not coming is because we love you. And they would say, well, Daddy, if you love us, take us. And we said, no, no, no. We love you too much to take you. You're staying home. And Mommy and I are going out. Now, when our children were young, they may not have understood the fullness of that statement. But in truth, ladies and gentlemen, when they grew up, they did understand it because they had the abiding confidence that the two most important people in their life loved each other. And that's the key. That's the gift that you give your kids. That is absolutely necessary. You are the head and the heart of the family. You must show them that you love each other. I used to go on a diet. I mean, these crazy diets. Now, Anne-Marie won't let me do that anymore. I went on a diet once. It was one of those crash, don't eat, just drink water, and 7 days later, or 7 days later you lose 10 pounds, and 7 days later you gain it back, one of those. And I was in the middle of this incredible fast, and I was teaching a class. It was like on a Wednesday night, the third or fourth day, and I was just bouncing all over the place. We happened to have had a nutritionist in the audience who said, I need to talk to you after class about what you're doing to your body. And she explained to me after class that, do you realize what is happening? She said, when you do this crazy stuff with your body, in fact, your major organs all get together and they go to a boardroom and they have a meeting. And your brain and your heart sit on one side of the table, your liver and the kidneys sit on the other, and they begin to dialogue realizing this guy, he's not bringing in enough nutrition to take care of us. And so what happens automatically, by God's design, the liver and the kidneys will systematically stop receiving nutrition so that the head and the heart, the brain and the heart, will get as much as they can. That is exactly what happens in the marriage relationship. Your children need the head and the heart to survive. That's why we're talking about the priority relationship. That's why giving your children something so beautiful as a loving relationship is one of the greatest gifts you can give your kids. We'll talk more on that in a moment. Principle 4 says this: since it's the priority relationship, all other relationships function subject to that of husband and wife. Subject speaks to the authority structure in the family from which the priority attitude can be worked out. Authority is God-given, and structure is an important element of a child's development. Child-rearing philosophies that promote the idea that parents should be reduced to an equal status with their children was never God's intent. If there is to be harmony and love in the family, parents must assume their God-given role by leading their family together. It's a co-regency. If you remove parental authority, or if you push the moral requirements back so far that you don't need parental authority, then chaos will visit not only your family, chaos is going to visit the society. What we must do is we must maintain the right relationship and the right view of the husband-wife relationship. Let's go on to child-centered parenting. What we have up to this point is the biblical record supporting the priority of the husband-wife relationship. But today things are different. We live in a society that is absolutely consumed with child-centeredness. Children are no longer welcome members of the family. They have become the center of the family. This condition is simply not healthy. Let me give you 2 reasons why it's not healthy. Number 1, child-centered parenting too often produces a meism attitude and life perspective in the child. Simply put, other people will not matter. Friends will not matter. Siblings will not matter. Child-centered parenting weakens family identity. In contrast, healthy families produce children with a weism attitude because from the beginning they were welcome members of the family, not the center of the family. This is all they know. The only thing they know is the giving and the taking together as a unit. The family should be likened as a team. Your family should be a team where everyone is playing for the good of the team, not for the good of the individual. That's what happens when you produce this weism attitude, when you understand the true concept of family. B on your outlines, a second condition of child-centered parenting is that it affects the very security of a child and increases the need for discipline. Let me explain this very important truth by looking at 3 priority needs of early childhood. Follow this, please. The 3 priority needs of early childhood. Number 1, a child has a need to know that he is loved by mom and dad. That's pretty basic. A child has a need to know that he is loved. Number 2, every child has a need to know where he belongs in mom and dad's life, where he belongs in the family. That's the positioning, the placement. That he's not an equal with mom and dad, but that he's still a giver to mom and dad, and he's a receiver of love. But third, a child has a need to know, this is the big one, that mommy and daddy love each other. This we consider to be a critical developmental need. How amazing it is that children, all children, your 2.5-year-olds, your 3-year-olds, they have a built-in sensor, radar device that hones in immediately on any parental conflict. It is an amazing thing. Even infants under a year can realize if there's conflict between mom and dad. That's how powerful this is. When a child perceives more weakness than strength in his parents' relationship, a low level of anxiety results, ultimately putting a strain on every learning discipline and experience that the child has. Now, follow this. Let me say it again to you. I'm going to make sure you guys have this. If a child has failed confidence in mom and dad's love relationship, that creates a low-level type of anxiety that puts a strain on every learning discipline. Because the child is constantly asking the question, Mom and Dad, how are you doing? And what is truly amazing is that these children, who are only 2 and 3 years of age, they have this fully developed need to know that Mommy and Daddy's relationship is solid. If that is in question, a child will begin to act out and do things in hopes of drawing the 2 of you together. Allow me to demonstrate this point by way of a story. A number of years ago, a father called me. A young father had a child that was getting up in the middle of the night. A new behavior. And with blanket in tow was going down to Mom and Dad's room and just standing there, once in a while hopping in. The parents would wake up, take the child back, tuck the little girl in her bed, talk to her, kiss her, pray with her, go back to the room. And a few minutes later, the little girl would come back out, go on down. Well, this was going on now for several weeks, and it was getting old. Mom and Dad, well, they threatened her, they bribed her, they promised her, they did all kinds of things. But ladies and gentlemen, nothing worked. So the father, out of desperation, calls me. And so we talked for a while, but Anne Marie and I realized that the best way to get to the heart of the problem is maybe spend some time with his family. So we made arrangements to go over to their house. We spent an evening with them, just visiting. We observed the little girl. Everything was fine. When they put her down from bed, no problem. She would say her prayers, get in bed, fall right to sleep. It was only in the middle of the night that this little girl was getting up and getting out of bed. So we all retired after she went to bed to the couch, and I remember that the father slaps me on the shoulder and says, "Hey, what do you think?" And after watching this girl and looking at this little girl, I said to him in a very daring way, "I really believe that your daughter is insecure." And he said, No. He said, "My daughter's not insecure. My daughter's not afraid of anything." And I shared with his dad, I didn't say your daughter was afraid. I said your daughter looks to be insecure. There's something going on inside of that little body. He said, how do you know? Her eyes. Her eyes revealed everything. I said, tell me, thinking about these principles that I've shared with you. I said, what do you do when you come home from work? And he began to go through the explanation of all that he would do, that he would come home from work and he would play with his daughter, and after he'd come in and said hello and greeted his wife, and they would take walks together, and then they would have dinner, and then sometimes they would go back and have more time together. And then I said, well, what do you do when that's all done? He said, well, we put her to bed. Then what happens? He said, well then that's our time. That's our time to be together as a husband and wife. So this is what I said to the father. I said, tomorrow, when you come home from work, instead of going in and giving your wife a kiss on the cheek and a pat on the head and going off and playing with your daughter immediately, what I want you to do is give your daughter a kiss on the cheek, and then I want you and your wife to go over to the couch, and I want the two of you to spend 15 minutes there talking to each other. Now, I'm going to tell you what will probably happen with your daughter. Your daughter will probably physically and emotionally pull on you. She's going to probably want Daddy to play with her. But this is what I want you to tell your daughter, lovingly but firmly. No. No. First, Daddy's going to spend time with Mommy. And when Daddy's done with Mommy, then Daddy's going to spend time with you, but Mommy's first. Now the husband was going, I don't know if this is going to work, but the wife was sitting in the chair going, oh, good, 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 good. Father agreed to try it. After 5 days, I heard from that dad who started off his conversation with, you won't believe it. I said, try me. He said, my daughter, after 3 days, started sleeping through the night. And all of the demanding behavior that was taking place during the day, it all seems to have had disappeared. I began to share with the dad after he asked me what happened, that I believed that his daughter's insecurity in her behavior was really driven by her need to know that the two of you had a love relationship that was tangible. See, of course, yes, during the day, just like in your family, the daughter heard from the mother who said, you know I love your father. And in the evening, the daughter heard from Dad who said, you know I love your Mommy. But the only time she ever saw the two of you in your role as a husband and wife was in the middle of the night when the two of you were trying to solve this problem, or the next night at the dinner table, she and her behavior was keeping the two of you talking with each other. And thus, since her behavior was driven by the lack of confidence in your relationship, no amount of spanking and no amount of nice words was going to curb that behavior. So it wasn't until the two of you routinely went over to the couch that you began to give her a visual sense of your togetherness. That's when she was able to breathe, in the truest sense, a sigh of relief. Oh. In her little heart she said, now, Mommy and Daddy, now that I know the two of you love each other, now that I can see the two of you together, now I can get on with my life without having to worry about or without having to try to orchestrate bringing the two of you together. You see, a child's orientation to life is framed in the reflections of reality that is all around. If that reality is void of the husband-wife relationship, then insecurity is fostered. And folks, when you touch security, you affect every other learning discipline. And I would say the most common way that we affect the security of our child is by not realizing how significant the husband-wife relationship is in a child's orientation, in a child's world. The couch time in this case simply provided the visual confirmation that this little girl needed to know that her parents really loved each other. Think about it. Let me take you back, okay? Just so you'll understand the significance of what is being said here. Remember when you were young? Remember when you were children? Maybe this happened more than you want to remember. Remember when it was nighttime and you were laying in bed as a little girl, as a little guy, and you could hear from the other room your mom and dad going at it. You could hear the yelling, you could hear the screaming, and your little heart was in tune to that. What is it that you wanted as a young child without anyone telling you? You just wanted to go up to your mom and dad, and you wanted them to love each other, and you didn't want your mom to yell at dad, and you didn't want dad to yell at mom. You knew, somehow you knew, intuitively you knew, if something happens to these two people, my whole world is going to collapse. That's how children see it. My whole world is going to collapse. Do you remember those occasions? Do you remember that feeling in your own heart? Don't do that to your children. And you could say, well, we have a great marriage. You know what? Well, our past is buried, and the both of us have overcome that. That's wonderful. Praise God. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that you are giving your children a tangible view of your love. This is an amazing thing. Ladies and gentlemen, children know intuitively, just as you and I knew when we were growing up, that if something happens to mom and dad, our whole world is going to collapse. If the parent's relationship is always in question in the mind of the child, then the child will always live his life or her life on the brink of collapse. And that's exactly what child-centered parenting does. It distorts the biblical reality of the family and emotionally pushes the child to the brink of disaster. Folks, there's a much better way. Give yourself over to the reality of Scripture. Give yourself over to the husband-wife relationship. By faith, understand you're going to give your children something very beautiful when you give your children a tangible love relationship between the two of you. Right now, I want to stop right there with this all-important lesson. I want to remind you, it doesn't matter what we teach you from this point forward. If you don't understand this concept, then everything we give you will be for naught, because it all rests on the priority relationship. Right now, honey, I'm going to have you get ready to come up. We're going to do our wrap-up session, and then we're going to take your questions. Well, Anne-Marie, it's always great to come to a wrap-up session and have you by my side so we could expand some of these concepts. I know that there was quite a bit of information here for the couples, but there was always also some challenging information for the single parent. Let's talk to the single parent right now. Let's talk to our class.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it can be very overwhelming for the single parent to sit and to hear how important the husband and wife relationship is and think, but I don't have a husband, so now what's going to happen to my children? Does this mean that they're going to have less of an opportunity to grow up in a healthy environment and all of that? And so I guess I really want to just encourage the single parents that are joining us with the years of testimonies that we have had in this ministry. And it goes all the way really back to one of our very first classes. We had a single mom that sat through this lesson and just was in tears.
Yeah, we did this at a conference, right?
Right,
the conference
right. And she shared with us the next day. She said, I went back to my cabin and I cried all night long because I realized how child-centered I was. My son's 10 years old, and I've spent the last 10 years just making him the absolute center of my life. His father walked out when he was just an infant, and I thought this was the best thing I could do for my son. But I realized the problems that we're having, I mean, the relationship that he and I have is almost non-existent. And she said, and she was relating this to us later, she said, I went home and I apologized to my son, told him that I was sorry for making him the center of the universe and that he was going to be a part of the team, and began to have couch time with the Lord, just like you suggested. And it was amazing. Within several days, I was visiting his school, and the teacher said, what has happened to your son? All of a sudden, there's been a change in his behavior and his demeanor. And I thought back on the lesson and the fact that I was having couch time and helped him to realize he was a welcome member to this family. And it was just amazing. And we felt really bad, you know, initially that she had gone back and was crying. And she says, oh, no, please, don't feel bad about it. I needed to hear that.
And the difference was, it's not that this mom never had devotions before, but she decided she needed to have her time with God in front of the child. In fact, let's transition from there to couch time, and let's make sure that you understand this concept. It's so critical. The issue isn't so much couch time, I mean literally the couch and being there. It is your children need to see you in an isolated moment when you are together as a husband and wife. Now, we are continually getting questions, well, my wife and I work together, and our children see us work together. Is that okay? And the answer is no. That is not okay, because the context of the day for you two is work. What your child needs to see you is out of that context and into that husband-wife relationship, and that's why it's so critical.
It is, and I think, in the illustration that you used, well, the story that we all lived through with that first couple that we had shared with the concept of couch time, part of the reason that the wife was so excited about the assignment is because we know what the reality is. In the evening after the kids go to bed, we still maybe have some laundry to fold. And if there's anything on the couch, it's usually our husband's asleep. And so we don't actually get to have real quality time together. So it is going to be, as you'll see later as you get your notes for this week, that your homework assignment is going to be to have couch time. And that's not just for this week. It's from today forward. And it isn't a punishment. It is so amazing when we talk to couples about it. It's like, you'd think we were sending you to hard labor to sit on the couch as a husband and wife. You married each other because you wanted to be together. So, this is something that you start, if you haven't already been doing it, get in the habit of doing it.
And it is powerful. This scenario that we presented with the little girl waking up in the middle of the night, that is not an isolated situation. That happens all over the country, all over the world. Sometimes it's discipline problems, but I remember we had some friends who relayed a story to us. One of our leaders was going through this particular lesson. They got to the point where we're at right now, and the leader said to the small group that was in his home, this week, starting tomorrow, I want you to go home and I want you to practice couch time. And they all agreed to do it, but one gentleman sort of was off in the corner, and he had a smile, and so the leader challenged him and said, what are you thinking? He says, well, I haven't shared this with any of the group, but my daughter happens, who is only 2.5 or 3 years of age, she has a sleep disorder. And my daughter has been to some of the best psychologists and sleep institutes to resolve this problem, and no one has fixed it. Now, what you're telling me, in fact, the last thing she was in a special massage technique that you get child massaged before sleep and see if that would, they did everything. And he said, now let me see if I understand this. You're telling me that my daughter, who gets up in the middle of the night, that she won't do it anymore if my wife and I go over and just sit on the couch for 15 minutes every day? He said, if that happens, he said, I will eat my shirt. And he said, but I don't think so. And so the leader humored him. He said, humor us, please. Would you just try it? And so they all went home, and they all were coming back. And before the class started, the next lesson, they said, let's talk about how do things go. And they went around the room and talked about the experience of couch time. Now, what did your children do, and how did they respond? And they finally got around to this guy. And they said, well, how did things go? And he began to unbutton his shirt. It was the most incredible things, and he realized it. That what was missing in the life of this child was something so simple. The confidence of seeing mom and dad's tangible love relationship. That was it. And it shows up different ways. In this case, for many children, it shows up with middle of the night sleep. But you know what? They will do almost anything. If your marriage relationship, your love between each other is in question, your kids will do just about anything to draw the two of you together. They'll take an innumerable amount of spankings, as long as the two of you are there trying to figure out what's wrong with this kid. Because seeing the two of you together is the security that they're looking for. And in their little hearts, they're thinking, if I have to do this to hold you together, it's worth doing. That's how strong. Now, again, you may say, we don't fight, we don't argue. Your kids still need to know that you two have a tangible love relationship. Anything more?
No.
Okay.
Probably have some.
Let's take some questions. Let's take some questions. Who would like? Okay, let's go to Eleanor.
Gary, Clay travels. He travels usually Monday through Friday, almost three times a month. So he's gone much of the week, and I'm wondering how we're going to fit couch time into our lives.
You know, Eleanor, your question would be very similar to what about those moms who are in San Diego, San Francisco, and out in Virginia, whose husbands may go out for a week or two, or maybe 6 months out to sea in the Navy, or other men who are traveling. What we recommend that you do when you have these unique situations is literally take Dad's picture and put Dad's picture on the coffee table. You go to the couch anyway. You have that set time. And you let the kids know that I'm having couch time with Daddy even though he's not here, but I'm just going to write him just a little short note about how much I love him. I'm going to ask you kids, since this is our couch time with Daddy, if you want to write your note, this will be your couch time also. And what we'll do is when you finish, I'm going to mail this out tomorrow. Or maybe you'll accumulate them and I'm going to mail it in a couple of days, whatever it may be. That's how you have couch time when Clay would be away. It's very practical, and moms write us back and tell us this thing has just worked wonderfully with their children. Anything more on that, hon?
Well, sometimes if it's not always convenient, but if you can make a phone call, you know, it's a set pre-timed phone call that you're going to make to your wife if you're away, and say, no, this is our uninterrupted time. So it's
Right.
because
Time, long
sometimes
distance.
some men, just their hours, they come home every night, but oftentimes it's after the children are in bed. So just having a time that they can call in while the children are still awake, that this is us and their couch time.
Okay, let's go to another question. Oh, wait a minute. Before we go to another question, when Clay does come home, Eleanor, make sure you have really good quality couch time on Saturday. Catch up for it, okay? Now let's go to another question. Who's next? Okay, Sean. Okay.
Gary, I have a question. It's about organizing your time immediately when you come home as a father. And sometimes I find that when I'm coming home, I come into the home, and Kathy indicates to me or tells me that there's some training issues, possibly some discipline issues that I need to take care of when I come home. And also I have the competing interest that I know it's critically important to spend that time with her alone, and at the same time letting the children know that we're having that time together. And I just wanted to get your insight, and Anne-Marie, on how to organize our time as a father, coming home with sometimes dual interests and responsibilities.
You know, Sean, it's a judgment call. There will be days when Kathy will say, oh, they're your kids too, get in this house, right? And then there are going to be days when it's, you know, huh, Sean, we've been working with Kelly, and this problem popped up. You're going to have to talk to her. Now, as to when you're going to talk to her, sometimes it's like, let's just sit down, have a cup of coffee, and chat. And sometimes it's going to be immediate. What you have to consider, especially in your family, because we're going from 12, almost 13, down to the little guy, just a little over a year. The way you deal with your children, it's all going to be different. Kelly, the oldest now, who's rapidly approaching the teen years, Kelly needs more quality time with Dad. He just can't come into the house and say, you know, your mother said you got in trouble today and I need to deal with it. You may be able to do that with the little ones, but when you've got to consider the age of your child. And so when you talk about organizing your time when Dad comes home, I think one thing, we sort of like had to develop it in our own house, and it's a preference, it's not thus saith the Lord, it's just that what we learned, is we sort of like had a 5-minute break time when Dad comes home, that it's just hi, hello, don't ask me any questions, and let's just kind of like let Dad settle in. Sometimes, Sean, it was nothing more than just changing our clothes and we were ready to go, whatever the issues were. But you're going to have to organize your time. You're going to have to consider the ages of your children. You're going to have to consider the needs of your children. Lord knows you're going to need to consider the needs of your wife on that day. What else on organizing time?
Well, I think, you know, again, what we need to remember is that the couch time is a vehicle that is delivering a principle, and the principle is the priority of the husband and wife relationship. And like we talked last week, we don't want you to become legalists with this. This doesn't mean as soon as you walk through the door, you've got to go immediately and sit down on the couch. You've got to take into consideration the context, how many children you have, what's happened during the course of the day. The principle is that somewhere in the course of the evening, that while your children are still awake, you have some time together as a husband and wife, that your children can know, no, this is Dad and Mom's special time.
Right. Thank you. Who's next? Let's go to Jim.
When I get home from work, my wife and I will sometimes sit in the kitchen or talk while she's making dinner. Is there any magic about the couch?
Oh, yes. In fact, if you have a hideaway bed with 2 pillows, that makes it even more spiritual. No, there's nothing magical about the couch. Obviously, couch time is the term we're using. But no, you guys may have that couch time in the kitchen. What we do suggest is that you don't be butterflies and float around every other day, that you have a common place. Now, maybe if for you guys, it's going to be in the kitchen. Maybe it's on a stool and you're talking. Couch time, though, is not going to take place, Jim, when you're sitting on the stool and mom's getting dinner ready. That's not couch time. That may be nice talk time, but in the mind of the child, that's not mom stopping and giving attention to dad. So wherever you may have it, there needs to be that give and take, the eye contact, just being together. And look, it may be 5 minutes, and it may be 10 minutes, and you guys may even enjoy it and go 20 minutes. The point is, you want to find some type of consistency throughout the week, and that consistency is going to include the place. And for any of you who wonder, can we go outside and do it? Yes, you can go outside. You can go outside and do it on the back patio if you want. Okay. Let me close it down with this one last challenge to you dads. Look, if you really love your children, men, then don't be afraid to sometimes, you need to take your wife out of her role as a mother and put her back into her role as a wife. You're not doing this to demonstrate your authority or your power. You are doing this because you really love your children. Your children need to see that. God bless you. We'll see you in our next session.